Hey, Mark.
Hey, Zach, you look all dark.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put on the light.
Oh, that's all right. That's right. You're not that beautiful.
No, I know I'm not that beautiful. Hey, yeah. I was hoping to get some wine to drink with you. Are we doing any tasters today? So you can, or give it a minute, but then you're ready to present if you want. I just wanted to put up a schedule for a minute.
Yeah, I'd like to try it right now, but
Go ahead, try it. Yeah, I let you share. Go ahead.
okay, let me just do that right quick. Share screen. I know we did it yesterday, but you never know. I had a series of, shall we say, IT issues this morning.
Excellent. It's working.
Okay, good. It was I was trying to make some last minute edits and the computer was not allowing me to add any slides, nor was it allowing me to save the file.
Yeah, I mean, literally, I think we have 21 people today.
Oh, do we? That's good to hear.
Yeah. Hopefully.
So we should get, what is it, the show up rate, the attendance rate, what, 3/4? Like a 75%?
Yeah, it is 3/4. Hey, Susan, long time no see. How are you?
You're on mute, Susan, if you
Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
No problem. How are you?
Okay. I'm gonna stay, not show my face because I'm dealing with an issue with my mother at the long-term care facility. I might have to keep answering the phone or something, okay?
No problem.
No,
Thank you.
I feel your pain, Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, she's gonna be 95 soon and they found bed bugs and,
Oh,
But all the
Yeah.
health for her, though. I mean, bed bugs is horrible.
yeah, it's a wonderful place in Baltimore, but this was a shocker.
wow.
Baltimore, you travel to Baltimore to see your mom all the time?
Well, we haven't been able to see her now for a year. They've been on lockdown.
Oh yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard.
yeah, understandably so. It's not like a stupid Cuomo, who does
Oh, no.
an idiot.
Oh my God, you can't.
Mark, you may not know our
Well, I've been reading, yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Oh my God, he just doesn't care. He causes, for elder generation to get COVID, and this guy's crazy.
Yeah, I had much better opinion of him early on in this thing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, he's just, oh my God. Now he's another Harvey Weinstein, apparently.
Oh no. That guy, that's a sicko. That's a real sicko.
We got plenty of those.
But what about Trump?
Oh
yeah, that's the thing. Trump is a champion of getting away with things like that. It's really, it's funny how people on the right give him a pass. And
yes.
I don't quite understand.
Mark, how is that your clock shows 11:28 and mine is showing 12:30?
Because you're New York is in a different time zone than Chicago.
I know, but it's 2 minutes early.
Yeah. Oh, what yours is? What, 12:26 or something, or
it's 12:31 already.
Yeah.
Oh, your server is 3 minutes ahead of mine.
No, it's a phone. It's a satellite.
Oh, well, I don't know what to say.
Now, Mark, you're in Chicago?
That's correct, ma'am.
Whereabouts? We've been there many times.
In Andersonville.
Yeah. Okay, sure, cool.
It's the former Swedish neighborhood that is the current lesbian neighborhood.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Leroy, how are you? We're just talking about lesbians. Sorry.
Hey, how's it going?
We were.
Guys.
Sorry, you just came in. I think we're on the wrong information today. We weren't. There's no. We'll not. Yeah, Leroy, thanks for joining. Susan, thanks for joining. I know
sure.
I dropped the bomb on you guys. I apologize, but
okay.
this is going to be one of the best presentations by far.
Oh, yeah.
Don't pump it up, Zach.
Or
Tell,
you can-
tell them this is going to be, it's going to suck. And so they'll.
Oh, it's gonna be the
they'll-
worst. No one will
Yeah,
come back ever.
I would rather exceed expectations than not.
Oh, you always do. You already did 2 presentations, so I know it's gonna be great. So. He did a presentation on Rommel.
Oh,
And I know how you like the World War II, Susan. And then he did the presentation on electric vehicles, which was really amazing.
cool.
So yeah, let's just say Mark knows what he's talking about. So that's a good thing.
Okay.
Hi, Greg. How are you, sir?
Good, good. How are you?
You can also put in a presentation mode, Mark, if you want.
If I can, yeah, I'd like, yeah.
You see the slide on slideshow on top? Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I use the one on the bottom.
Oh yeah, you can do that one. However, what do you have? Windows 7, Windows 10, or Windows of any kind?
I'm sorry, was that a question to me?
Yeah, was it Windows 10 or Windows 7? Because still can't navigate Windows 10.
I don't know. I use what they tell me to use, and that's the extent of it.
Yeah. Interesting. A lot of new people today. That's awesome. Aaron, we know Aaron. Aaron, how are you?
Aaron is here.
Yeah, Aaron.
Ah, cool.
Aaron, we're missing for the world, man. Mark's presenting.
Yeah, I know. I know. I was looking forward to it.
That's a good news. Yeah, and hopefully, if you guys have any wine, or whoever doesn't drink, just try to drink water. We can toast at the end, and to this, to this nice, or beer, whatever you guys have, or just tea. Tea is good. Tea.
Coffee.
Coffee. I haven't had coffee today. Yeah, correct. Yeah, I mean, this is just a good understanding. I mean, to me, I was like listening to a little bit of history, and I didn't know, and Mark can probably talk to it, and I don't want to spoil it, but I didn't know the wine was, initially came from Caucasus.
Oh, you're stealing my thunder.
I did. I apologize. Sorry.
But that's but that's Zach's marketing. That's his marketing engine.
Yeah.
So should I reduce this? Can you guys see this part?
This is awesome. This is really full screen.
Yeah.
Great.
No, but can you see Aaron's name and Leroy and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, because
Okay, no, let me just diminish that then. 'Cause there's no
you can
there's no
move it
reason
up
for you
and
to
down
see that.
however you like it. You can actually
Yeah.
move it down or up.
Yes, I put it as much out of the way as possible.
Yeah, and you can just also minimize it and just see the person that's talking or presenting or asking a question.
That's what you should be seeing now.
Oh, no, well, yeah, I mean, but right, exactly. Actually, I would like to make you a co-host. Let me see if I can make you a co-host right now,
What difference does that make?
just in case if I have internet issues, nothing gonna get disconnected. I
Oh.
will. Yeah. Sometimes it's Spectrum. What do you guys have as an internet service in Chicago?
I have AT&T, and there's a bunch of them, but I have AT&T. So
We actually have monopolies around different areas. Like
Really?
Spectrum Time Warner is all Queens, and then we have in Long Island. I can't even. I think it's RCI or something. I don't remember.
well, congratulations, because we all know the high standards of customer service with monopolies.
Yeah, Spectrum is like good luck. There's been outages in our areas like left and right. So we have some new people. CM, how are you? Yeah, Mark, if you want to give it a couple more minutes, people to get,
Oh yeah. I was gonna ask you how many people we have. If we
right,
reach
so far just 10, but people are trickling in right now.
so we're at 50%.
It's yes, but more trickling in.
Mhm.
While people are trickling in, I'm just gonna go through over the schedule quickly. I'm not gonna post it, but I'm just gonna read off it right now. So if you guys don't mind, so that use this time. So tomorrow we have Rise and Fall of Odd Sex. Sergio is presenting. Then on, let me just navigate through it. Gulag Archipelago on Wednesday. We have Hadrian presenting that one. And he's going to talk about particular policies that, led to the Gulag Archipelago and Stalinism, and stuff like that. Then on what else we have? So we have that. On 320, we have Hellenistic. Paul is going to talk about what does it take? I'm saying Paul will say, what does it mean to be Greek? He's talk about Greek identity. On 328, we have Richard and Sam presenting stateless ethnicity. On 324, we have Plato Apology of Socrates that Greg is going to present. On 331, we have a guest appearance of Joshua, who just finished the book of Viking relations with Al-Andalus and is going to present that with Muhammad. They're going to talk about the Muslim and Viking relationship. Apparently there was some, which I'm not really familiar with, but they wrote the book on it. So they're going to talk about their book and they're going to do a presentation. That's pretty much it for March. Lisa have gave me an idea to talk about Amarna period of Egypt. So I put in for 4:15. Lisa, let me know if that's okay or if that's too ambitious for me.
Yeah, we can.
You might be mute.
No, I think Lisa needs to log off and log on because. Oh, maybe now she's mute. Okay.
Just mute.
Now she should have unmute herself.
Yeah.
So, does it work?
Oh, I'll dial back in, Zach, please.
Yeah. Because if it doesn't work.
I'll push the date back. Okay, no problem.
Exactly. It says here we have 8 participants.
Yeah, because Lisa will dial back in. Give it time. 5 more minutes.
Yeah, my time is your time.
Yeah. 1 second. Let me just post, say we're live.
When do you start the recording?
There it is. I already started.
Oh.
I'll just cut out the front.
Yeah, good.
Let me just say people live. Sometimes people just wake up a little late. We are live. Yeah, here people are getting back in. Already 11. He is Sergio. How are you?
Hey, how you guys? Today's your birthday, Zach?
Yes, sir.
Hey, that's
Hey,
right.
Zach.
Yeah, happy
Really?
birthday.
Wow.
Happy
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh
We're
my
supposed to have
God.
this presentation on Thursday. I was like, let's move it to make it more celebratory,
Yeah.
So Zach, Zach, you're drinking champagne then right now?
No, I actually have wine. No, I go,
But you should do like a prosecco right now, or like.
Oh, here we go.
Mimosa. That would
Wait,
be
Aaron, are you saying Zach's birthday is not worthy of champagne? He'd have to drink.
No, it is, but it would be a warm up to celebrating at the final celebration would be champagne. So this would be the
You do want to work your way up, then not wait. No,
exact.
yeah.
Right. You have to increase the proof. That's the idea.
Yeah, so Mark, forgive me if I've mentioned something off your, because I'm already drunk. I'm just kidding. No.
So this would be our first true drunk history. Hopefully that doesn't offend anybody, but
Well,
Yeah, well, in a sense, yeah, I'm not inebriated.
Well, no, technically the beer one would have been the first one.
that's
At least
right.
for me.
Beer
For me, it
that
would have been.
Were you inebriated, Sergio, during that?
Sorry?
Were you inebriated during it?
Yes, sir. Before and after.
Okay, all right then. Yeah, I'm a Johnny come lately then.
No. This is the official one. This is like a real avant-garde one. The other one was just casual, just show up, casual Tuesday. So this would be the official drunk history, as far as history buffs goes.
Yeah.
So I'll give that.
Hey,
Weekend and all.
Sergio, did you get my last message?
I did get it. Yeah, I'm on the clock right now. Well, no, I'm not. I'm on my lunch break, but yeah, as much as I'd love to have a glass of Bordeaux or whatever you guys are recommended, but yeah, I'll have to have it when I see the rest of this on YouTube later. So
But what line of work has you working on a Saturday?
I work in hospitality, so I work in hotels.
Oh, really?
So we're open 7 days a week. Even though it's slow right now, we still have some rivals. Not many. Most people from like the tri-state area that could travel. So yeah, so we have people coming.
What tri-state is for you is New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut?
Sure. Yeah, Westchester, Long Island, even people that just come for a weekend or just to stay, just to change it up a little.
What do you
But
do there?
normally- Sorry.
What do you do?
I'm in operations, so everything from administration to accounting, and I even do concierge work. So today, that's what I'm doing. So it's like 3 of us that run.
Gotcha.
Like
Well,
a
I'm happy that you're still employed at this.
I am too. It's a small operation, so that's why we don't have that many. But some of our friends that work in those larger hotels, they really laid off a lot of the housekeeping staff and the front desk staff. So yeah, I'm very fortunate in that respect. But yeah, I do have to sometimes work weekends and holidays, but it's okay. It works out, so can't complain. Yeah.
So you could start, go ahead, Mark, if you want.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I wanted to do with this is, according to the title From Pangaea to Pasteur, this is a history of wine up until the end of the 19th century. And it's kind of a history of the wine itself, the history of technology, history of commerce, the relationship between grapes, wine, and humans. And one of the things I wanted to start off with is I'm not an historian, but I have had a side gig in the wine industry since '05. So I had some experience in retail, selling wine, wine education. I've worked in a couple of boats, cruises in Germany. I'm a certified Bordeaux educator. So every 3 years I go back to Bordeaux to get recertified. So it's things like that I know something about wine. So if people have questions along the way about wine or at the end, I'm more than glad to answer. That's more my expertise than the history, but this is really about the history. And one of the things that I like as an introduction, one of the things that I love about wine is that it helps introduce you to so many other topics, just knowing wine better. It opens you up to learning about history, just raw history, wars and demographics and everything like that. It opens up knowledge of geography, geology, biology, chemistry, genetics, climates, languages, economics, archaeology, and the list goes on. You learn about wine and you can take so many different paths down other, not domains, but disciplines. So that's one of the things I really like about it. So a few themes for today's presentation. Want to talk about the geographic origin and how it got dispersed both by nature and by humans, how it survived basically, how humans started their knowledge and then growing the knowledge about growing vines and how to make vines and how to make wine, and how some of this understanding eventually started to get written down and codified, and it was transmitted by books, and people could read a book written centuries before and learn, oh, this is what I want to do. This is how to do this, as opposed just to learning from someone right next to you. And then of course, overall, the role of science and technology. And in this presentation, when I say technology, I don't mean electric vehicles and servers and all that kind of thing. I mean, it's starting with very basic technology like clay pottery, okay? So the thing starts with Pangaea. So 225 million years ago, all the continents were attached basically. And at that time, there were two groups or two basic kinds of grapes. One is, I actually forget the name of it. It's kind of hard to pronounce. It's Vitis ampelopus, not very well known. And I mention it just to say it's not important. The one that is important is Vitis vinifera. And that is the grouping of all the grapes, wine grapes, that we know today. And as Zach had mentioned, Vitis vinifera is actually from the Caucasus. So when there was Pangaea, you had two different kinds of grapes. When these continents split, you had that other kind of the Ampelopus in the Western Hemisphere, it's maybe in Africa, some other places. But Vitis vinifera, which gives us all the wine, was from the Caucasus. And it's basically, it survived the splitting of the continents. It survived multiple ice ages. So it would have been probably in existence in a greater geographic scope, but it got reduced by all these ice ages, and it was living just in the North Caucasus. So basically Georgia, Azerbaijan, Eastern Turkey, maybe Dagestan, southern part of Russia there, and that's it. And that's where humans started fermenting grape juice. The first probable alcoholic drink is mead, which is fermented honey, because that can happen in nature. Just some honey falls in a crook of a tree or anything like that. Some water gets in, yeast get in, it ferments. That can happen. Nature cannot make beer. People have to make beer. It's more like you need human intervention to make wine, because you have to crush the grapes. It's a rare instance that a grape will start to ferment inside the grape. It's been known to happen, but it's very rare. Wine needs that initial intervention. And a lot of people will ask, why grapes? Why is wine from grapes such a big deal, as opposed to cider from apples or pears or what have you, or other fruit? The reason is that Vitis vinifera grape has more sugar in it than any other fruit on earth. So what do you get from sugar? You get alcohol, and that's why we do it. All right. So just to be clear about the fermentation, because a lot of people don't know this, but it's very simple. What happens is in grapes, you have water. Basically, you have sugar water. When you crush the grapes, yeasts are floating all over the place. The same yeast, if you ever make sourdough bread, you put some flour and a slurry with water, you put it on a countertop, yeast will find that and start to ferment it. It actually creates a little alcohol. So you don't actually need to find yeast. The yeast will find the sugar. And the chemical or biochemical process that goes on is that the yeasts eat the sugar. Sugar is a rare thing on the planet, and every organism wants a piece of that sugar, everyone. Yeast get at it, and the fermentation produces two things. One is alcohol, or ethanol, and CO2. Now, if you've ever seen pictures of a vat of wine fermenting, it's bubbly on top. That's the production of CO2. If anybody's seen a home brew in process, you see those little bubbles coming up from the bottom and a foamy mousse. That is carbon dioxide. All right, so this is the first vinification picture I wanted to show. The thing about Vitis vinifera, the grapevine, and it was a bit of an epiphany when I first learned about it. It is a vine. It's like ivy. If you ever seen vines climbing up an old building, it looks nice on a brick building, it's very picturesque. Vitis vinifera is the same thing. It's a climbing vine. And in nature, its favorite thing to do is to climb up a tree and to use that tree as a frame, so to speak, to reach better light. And it's actually kind of a parasite on the tree. It's been known, it's rare, but it's been known to kill a tree if it's in certain circumstances. What the vine wants to do is climb up the tree to get at better light and basically steal light from that tree. And once the vine reaches towards the upper reaches of the tree and gets enough light, it triggers a signal within that plant that next year we're supposed to make fruit. And the reason it wants to make fruit is so that birds and other animals can eat the fruit and basically poop out the seeds at some distance, and that propagates the species in a greater geographic area. And the reason I wanted to show you this photo, and this photo is from a Portuguese region called Vinho Verde, that also makes a wine called Vinho Verde. And it just means green grape, green wine, or young wine, actually. So I wanted to show you this. This is the closest picture I could find of Vitis vinifera grapes in nature. So this is how people initially did it. And I've seen there's a great documentary, I think you can see it on Amazon Prime, called Our Blood is Wine, all about Georgian wines. If you want to learn about wine, it's a great thing. And they show a tree, like 200 or 300 year-ish tree with a vine growing up it. And it just keeps producing. It's an awesome thing. So when you, later on, if anybody has been in a wine region, you've seen these nice, symmetrical, beautiful rows of vines. This is a copy where we're training the vines to do what we want. Here, in these Portuguese, they're letting the vine do what it wants in nature. But in wineries, it's easier to do it, and it's more controllable by horizontally training the vines. All right, so here just a map of the Caucasus. The red spots are some archaeological sites. So this is the area where Vitis vinifera, the mother grape, so to speak, of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and everything like that. This is where it's from, and this is representing only of the archaeological sites that we know of. I'm quite positive in the centuries to come there'll be more. And in this region, there's a bit of a pride race, so to speak. A competition about who has the oldest archaeological evidence. Where is the oldest archaeological evidence of winemaking? First, it was Iran. There's a place in Iran. Then it was Armenia, and right now Georgia holds the title. So basically, 6,300 BCE is the oldest, and this is it. This is the archaeological site just outside of Tbilisi. I apologize for the first of many fuzzy pictures, but if you can see here, you can see little circles here, right here. And there's a partial circle and some other here. These are vessels dug into the ground where the wine was fermented. We don't know how they did it per se. Did they crush the wines in wicker baskets and pour it in there? Did they throw the whole grapes in there and crush it? Or they crush it in their hands? Who knows? But that's where it was fermented. And the reason we know this, and I'll show you this one here. These are, again, fuzzy picture, I apologize. This is some of the pottery from that site. Now, the main thing here is this one here. There's some things to note about this. One is the width. It's widest in the middle, and it has no handles. And here this is a grape motif according to the archaeologists. Now, the reason why the lack of handles is important and this width, if you look at this, and I can't tell you how tall, wide this is, but this is a big vessel. It's not very carryable. It would be very awkward to carry, especially with no handles. So the assumption is that this was not for transportation. This was for fermentation in place, in situ. And the other reason we know that is these shards of the pottery of other ones had two chemicals, one of which is tartaric acid, which is produced by the fermentation of wine. So it wasn't just grape juice. It wasn't something else. It was fermented grape juice that was in this.
Mark?
Yeah, please.
So just want to make sure. So the fermentation of wine can happen naturally, right? In the nature.
It would be difficult because the fermentation, because what you do, it's
How did they get the idea, the humans?
We don't know. This is prehistory. It goes too far. There are no written records. We don't know.
How did they got the
So, I mean, by
first idea?
accident, somebody must have left.
Right?
Yeah, I think somebody must have left something out for a while, and they start to see the bubbles.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. That's the assumption anyway. That someone had grape juice, and maybe they had a bunch of it and didn't have a chance to drink it all, and they left it for a few days, a week, and they noticed, wow, this tastes funny, but they kind of liked it, and you drink, you get your calories where you can. And they actually, after a while, they learned, hey, wait a minute, if we let this go a little bit longer, it tastes even better. And there's also a link with religion. There's a hypothesis that the alcoholic effects were the cause of shamanism, or one cause of shamanism, and of religion. And in the Middle East, wine and religion are rather intertwined.
Sure, certain Greece too. I just wanted to mention that the favorite wine of Stalin, who was Georgian, is King's Marauli, which is the wine from that region.
Yeah, it's a dry white wine. We were reading the same sources.
Yeah, no, King's Maroli is red. King's Maroli is red, and it's a little sweetened. It's kind of sweet.
It's dry. He's right. It's dry. It's not. It's red dry wine. King's Maroli, yeah. Semi-sweet is alcohol honey. Alcohol honey is semi-sweet. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it's interesting that
Georgians are also the most ancient inhabitants of Caucasus Mountains, from what we know among other cultures.
Kalkheti.
Yeah.
And so it's the name of them. Yeah. There's an interesting. Georgians used to do comedy pieces in former Soviet Union, and one of the comedy pieces was about them producing the wine, and they would get the wine from the same, let's say, vessel, and they'll just slap a different label on it, because in Russia nobody cared. It's a wine is a wine. So Akalkheti, Kildzmarauli was all the same wine, but they would just slap a different label. It was part of the comedy.
Yeah. Okay, so this we're still in Georgia here. This is what the Georgians will call a Cavery. This is a solid one piece of pottery that is baked in a huge oven. This is, if you can imagine, or remember those circles we saw at the Tbilisi archaeological site, those were the ancestors of this Cavery. And believe it, this is on the vertical side. So this would have been, in reality, pointing up so that the opening is horizontal to the ground. And believe it or not, someone would have to crawl in that thing. They would, you put your grapes, you ferment your grapes at the end of the season when you're you have to take the wine out of that in a rather awkward sort of way. But someone has to go into that thing in order to take the spent grapes and remove those spent grapes out of there. You have to empty the Cavery. And I've done this in Bordeaux. I had a short internship at a winery. So I've done this in a vat of something that was like 10,000, 15,000 liters or something like that. And you crawl inside a similar hole, and then someone gives you a shovel and you're shoveling the spent grapes out. And if anyone's ever had port wine, it's like being inside of a bottle of port. The alcohol fumes are still going. You can actually, I've been told you can get drunk off the fumes, that you should not drive after this sort of work. And it's kind of dangerous. It's easy to hit your head and everything like that. It's very cramped. It was interesting to have done once, but I wouldn't want to necessarily do it twice. This is the same sort of pottery, but this is from the Iranian site. That goes about 5400 BCE. So again, same sort of thing. The width is kind of at greatest towards the middle at the bottom. That would give it stability. The Iranian example has a vertical lip there. Not sure why that would be per se, but maybe it's stylistic. I'm not sure the function. This is the Armenian site. So this is a cave site. This site would have to be very, very appropriate for making of wine. The humidity is right. The airflow is right. They dug holes into the floor of the cave. And people have lived here in this area making wine since 4000 BCE. And actually there's nearby, there's a modern winery just within a few kilometers of this site. So it's Armenians, Georgians, all take great pride in this history. Obviously in Turkey and Azerbaijan, Muslim areas. So in those areas, unfortunately, that history gets lost. There was a rich history of winemaking, but it's lost to history. This, I just want to talk about alcohol in ancient societies. Why do people drink alcohol? I mean, I think this is no surprise. It eases social tensions. There was a link early on with religion. If you spend a long day not getting eaten by lions or building a temple in the hot sun, it's nice to have a drink at the end of the day, whether that's beer for the commoners, or maybe wine for the elites. It acts as a social lubricant. So this is another map. I just love maps.
Hey.
They're great at explaining things. Yes.
Mark, yeah, this is Lisa. Just real quick, did wine also serve as a way to for safer drinking?
Absolutely.
You know, like how beer was right, same thing.
Yes. The same thing with beer. Beer is a way, they call it liquid bread, and it's a way of preserving bread. Wine is a way of preserving grape juice that will go bad. If you talk about fermentation writ large, you know, there's alcoholic fermentation, beer, wine, you know, that kind of stuff. There's other kind of fermentation that, like curing meats, sauerkraut, kimchi, soy sauce, numerous different things that I can't think of off the top of my head. Fermentation is a way of letting nature pre-digest something and thus preserving it for humans later on. And in a time when you didn't have refrigerators, this was a great way to secure food, basically. And the other thing is with wine, I don't know quite why this happens, but when you're creating alcohol from the sugar, for an equal unit of alcohol is worth 4 times the nutritional value calorically as the same unit of carbohydrates. So I can't give it more details than that, but it's basically, wine is more energy dense than the equivalent carbohydrate or sugar.
I also think, if I may add,
please,
that the wine was used to cleanse the water, and that's why people didn't drink water. They
exactly,
drank,
yes.
And hazy, for instance, in Greek culture, and we're talking about maybe 700 BC. You know, he
but can I
actually
add
writes
something?
He writes 4 to 1. He writes that you have to mix 4 parts of water for 1 part of wine. That's the way you should drink it.
Okay, yeah, you just answered the question, because I feel like if you're drinking enough wine, I think it's going to make you thirsty than hydrated, right?
That's 4 to 1. That was the proper way to drink water.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because they didn't have wastewater plants. So, and particularly if you moved out of your area at all, that you'd be exposed to different kinds of bacteria and such. And that could make you sick. And even there was no sanitary conditions. So yeah, water, they didn't know that you could corrupt the water and get sick. So yeah, adding some wine would help for that. Yeah, absolutely. So this map, you've got the Caucasus here. Okay, this is the origin. This is the site, the Iranian site, Haji Firuz Tepe. So also, I think it was also separate. I don't know if it came from the Caucasus, went here, I think so, but it also went to Anatolia, this area here. And then you can imagine very easily, it went down to Mesopotamia, because they could just float the wine down the river. It's very easy way of engaging in commerce. In Mesopotamia, they did make some wine themselves, but overall, that area is much, much better for growing grain, hence beer. So wine was always seen as the drink of the elites, the very rich, not so much for the workers. I mean, there are exceptions. There's some evidence that some workers were paid in wine, but as well as beer. Probably as time went on, as the wine perhaps got cheaper as commerce got more and more developed. And then from Anatolia, and the other thing was the name for wine, the Mesopotamian name for wine was mountain beer. So they essentially, beer is your alcoholic drink. This beer in quotations comes from the Anatolian highlands, so they call it mountain beer, which is kind of cool name for it. And then there's another one, another movement, so to speak, from Anatolia to the Levant. And here are the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians took it to a greater level, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more organized. And then it went over to the Egyptians. And the story we'll get into later. But one thing that's kind of cool to note, that millennia before there was any wine grown in Europe, where we mostly associate wine, there was wine being made in North Africa, which to me was kind of a cool thing, how things have changed. Now this is an image. This is the mountain beer being transported on the Euphrates or Tigris from Anatolia to Sumeria. These round boats were still used in Iraq into the 20th century. How they maneuvered these things is beyond me, but these things, you have 4 rowers or navigators. These things in the center, I believe, are wine sacks. So they just pile these things in, float them down, and then sell their goods, and then walk back home, maybe filling up their boats, or maybe selling them, who knows. This is the same sort of information, but it gives you a greater sense of time, and with the arrows that it's a little bit more visual, so to speak. So you have it's 1 to 6 basically. So you've got the wine coming from wine technology, viticulture going from the Caucasus, Anatolia, Phoenicia, Egypt, Cyprus, Crete, Greece, Tunisia, North Africa, Italy. It was the Greeks who brought it to Italy. It was the Phoenicians who brought it over to Tunis, and one of their colonies eventually became the Carthaginians. It goes to Iberia. That was also Carthaginian, and they were producing a lot of wine before they lost to Rome. The number 5 here, this is coming from the Romans, and then the Roman army is taking the grapes up all the way up to England, Germany, and then it goes over to the Balkans. So this gives you a sense of how man picks up these grapes and moves things around. And this is just obviously the European part. Now we get back to the Phoenicians. And so the reason I want to put this map up is it shows the trade routes of the Phoenicians, and it's primarily Southern Mediterranean. That's where their trade routes are. So they're going over to Cyprus, Crete, they're going to the Egyptians, and then over here to Carthage and Iberia. So this is why, and then also Western Sicily ended up being Carthaginian, where Eastern Sicily was Greek. And so there are conflicts there. But this is where the technology, this is where wine was being sold, and eventually the technology writ large of how to grow vines and make wine expanded. That was because of the Phoenicians. Now this is a rendering, an artist's rendering of a recent find in, I believe, Lebanon, but it was Phoenician. And it's a great image because it shows you what is going on. So picture the previous image of the Georgian site. And this is already an improvement. You've got the ergonomics of a pool here. You've got the ergonomics of these rafters, these poles, horizontal poles with these ropes hanging down to make it easier for the guy stomping the grapes. It looks like a female here having gathered the grapes, put them in wicker baskets, and they're dumping them here. You've got a little opening, like a drain for the juice to come out. That makes it easier. And this is where the wine would ferment. These guys are putting a cover over the wine because animals would want to get at it. Some insects are always going to get in. They probably weren't too bothered with that. And then for the transportation, these are amphorae, and you notice that these have handles. So these are amphorae for transportation. Put a couple on a donkey, and you're off to market. This is how the Phoenicians did it. So already there's a sense of better organization, technology writ large. They're getting a handle of how to be more efficient at creating the wine. This is an Egyptian image on a tomb, 1400 BCE. It's a wall painting on the tomb of Khnum, who was the mayor of Thebes around 1400 BCE. So it shows a Canaanite or a Phoenician ship arriving in port in Egypt. And this larger guy is interpreted to be the captain. This guy here on the right has just opened an amphorae. So this is transportation of wine. That you see, you've got the handles. The captain is holding aloft the wine in a vessel and some incense. I think the interpretation is, hey, thanks gods for we arrived safely in port. Thanks very much, you know. And there's a ceremony to mark that safe arrival. Now to the Egyptians, and this is kind of an interesting thing. Is this you can see if you look at it. This goes in time from upper left down here to the right, then down, and then to the lower left in time, so to speak, in terms of the process, the workflow. If you notice these grapevines are in kind of in a canopy. Think of the photo I showed with in Vinho Verde, where the vines were just climbing up. This has, what they're doing is they're starting to train, quote unquote, the vines in a way that is more convenient for the humans to collect the grapes. But it's still bows to nature, and that you know, this is how the grape wants to grow. This also has the benefit of, in the hot Egyptian sun, of creating some shade for the workers. Then you see them gathering, and then here, think of that Phoenician pool where they're stomping. This is basically the same thing. The view is horizontal, so to speak. It's not at an angle, but you get the same idea. You've got these rafters up here. You've got the ropes here. These guys are holding on. They're stomping the grapes. You know, it's going into another pool, and then going into containers. Most of which seem to have handles. So these are amphorae for transportation to probably some distribution center or something like that. What the idea is, I don't know of all the evidence they have, but it's believed by historians and archaeologists that what happened with Egypt, and this was, remember, there was a Nile River Delta where they were growing these vines, is that at first the Egyptians imported wine, and they liked it, and they decided to start growing wine themselves, but they didn't know how. So basically what they did was they imported the labor, then they brought in consultants, so to speak. They brought in the Phoenicians who knew how to do this and told them, hey, we will pay you. We will, provide the land, we'll provide the labor, make the wine here. The idea is that basically the Egyptians owned the land, they were the investors, the Phoenicians were the consultants, winemakers, those people still exist to this day, and the Nubians were the workers. They provided the workforce, so to speak. And one of the cool things about this is an economic story that goes on to this day. You can think of China when it started to rise economically. They imported knowledge from the outside world and started their manufacturing. It's the same sort of process. Now to transportation. So there are different vessels. Remember the vessels we saw in the Georgian example without any handles? They were sunk into the ground. These are amphorae. They have handles. This is a picture that I took in a museum in the south of France, Marseille, an old Greek colony. This is how amphorae were transported in ships. So you have to imagine, this is obviously a reconstruction of a cross-section of a commerce vessel of the Mediterranean, and they take old amphorae and they put this in. The ropes help keep them secure, but also there at the bottom, they would put sand. And ports back then were often just a beach, where you could beach your ship, take things off, load things on. So something like sand was rather cheap and available. So you put sand here on the bottom that helps keep the amphorae stable. That's why amphorae have the pointy bottoms. And the sand and the wine acted as ballast to keep the wine or the boat more stable in rough waters.
Mark, question before we
Please.
move on. Was the wine in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Phoenicia mixed, or they drank it just straight up like that?
I don't know for them. I know about the Greeks and the Romans. It's a good question. I don't know that. It might not even be known. But you remind me about one thing about the Egyptians that I forgot to mention is, I don't know if you guys know the word appellation, like a viticultural appellation, just means the name of an area that makes wine. One of the reasons we know that the winemakers were Phoenician is in King Tut's tomb. They found containers of wine. It had all evaporated by this time. But they found on the outside, there was writing, Egyptian writing. And from the cartouche, the writing itself, they could tell the winemakers were, the words were Phoenician, or the names were Phoenician. So the winemaker was Phoenician. And the hieroglyphs showed where this wine was from and when it was made. So the Egyptians were they were advancing the sophistication. They, at least for the pharaoh at least, they paid a lot of attention, like we do today. Where is this wine from? Who made it? What vineyard is this? So they were doing this a few millennia ago. So this is quite a level of sophistication on the part of the Egyptians. So
I know Greeks thought that only barbarians drink their wine unwatered.
Exactly. That's yeah. I know about the Greeks and the Romans. I can't answer, unfortunately, that question about the Egyptians or the Sumerians. Now these are called dolium. I don't know if that's a singular or they're plural with Latin. The image on the upper left is something I took from Wikipedia. The image on the lower right is from a museum, picture I took in a museum also in Marseille. This is a Roman site. This site itself is a distribution site. These are dolium where things were stored. This site is maybe 30, 40 meters from the old port today. But back in the Greco-Roman period, this would have been just off the beach. And a great place for a distribution site. So these dolium, and you can see that the opening here, you can tell that this was wider towards the center for stability. These things would have held olives, olive oil, garum, which is a fish sauce, wine, anything and everything that would have been traded. This is basically a distribution site. So people would have brought amphorae and poured them into these vessels for storage. So all of these things had different uses for different forms of the pottery. We're starting to get some sophistication here. Okay, again, I apologize for the blurriness of the image. This is you can't even read the text, but this is the Greek trade routes. So if you remember the Phoenicians, they're coming from here and they had the southern Mediterranean with a few forays in Spain, Sicily. The Greeks are taking more the north. And they're going, the one thing about Greece and wine, the Greeks very much push sophistication in production of wine. One of the things about Greece is that it's not a great agricultural country. It's full of mountains. There are not a lot of plains, so to speak. And you need plains to grow wheat and calorically heavy grains and things like that. But grapes, and you make good wine on slopes, and we can get to that, why that is later. So the Greeks could specialize, so to speak, economically in the production of wine. And they got to such a point where they could make more wine than they could possibly consume. And hey, that makes great for export. We'll export it and make money. The Greeks also exported, so to speak, their citizens, and they created colonies in Asia Minor and the Black Sea, Sicily, Italy. And that helped create more trade. And eventually these colonies would bring in vines and grow wine there. It was the Greeks who brought in viticulture to Italy, especially in southern Italy. The Greeks already had a great talent in making ships. So what you're doing here, they're taking wine a rather long distance, and a lot of things can spoil. So what the Greeks would do, they would line the amphorae, these are amphorae for transportation, they would line it with pitch or some kind of tree sap or something like that, and then seal the amphorae so the wine would not spoil. It wouldn't be exposed to any more oxygen than was in the amphorae when it was sealed. And that it wouldn't breathe at all. And that would help make the wine last for a longer voyage. They also did a couple other things. They worked the viticulture, the winemaking, to create more alcohol and keep more sugar, keep the wine sweet. And those are 2 of 3 ways of preserving a wine. Another one is the tannins. And then this is today. Some of the longest aging or ageable wines are dessert wines, particularly if they have acidity. The acidity is another preservative. And there's even to this day, there's a Greek wine called Retsina. And I believe it's connected to the word resin. They don't make it with tar, but they basically just add tar to a white wine, and it has a kind of a tarry flavor. Not bad. It's kind of it's its own thing. It's a what do they call it? Something that you need to appreciate it, so to speak. I've had it once. It's not something that I would try again per se, but it's not something that I sought after that. The other thing is, not to say anything that other civilizations didn't do this before, but the Greeks really married wine and religion. They had their own wine god. There was a notion, there was a particular festival once a year for Dionysius, who was the wine god. And one of the aspects of that festival is that people got blind drunk. And there was kind of an ideological religious notion that by drinking wine, you're drinking the blood of the wine god. And you can think of a couple of other Middle Eastern religions where that idea is still held. It also, with the Greeks, the drinking of a wine started to get connected with a contract. 2 merchants get together. Yeah, please.
You just mentioned, think about that Jesus and wine, same thing, blood.
With
that
who?
Must have come, well, the Jesus, they must have come from that cult where the people consider that wine is the blood of God. Because
Exactly. That's what I meant by the 2 other Middle Eastern religions.
Right. Okay.
I was being a little furtive in my vocabulary there. And so there's the idea of not just shaking hands at the end of a contract, but to show your sincerity in your contract, because there was no legal recourse, you would drink wine together to show by drinking this wine, I promise that I swear that I will pay X amount for the goods that you deliver by X date. So that became kind of more and more of the culture. I won't talk about the symposium and everything like that. Well, I think everybody kind of in this group already knows about that.
I would love if we went back to that kind of contract management. That would be great.
Yeah. I'm with you. Now, okay, so this is the Roman press. So think I want to go back to, this is a Phoenician. So you've got guys, holding ropes and stomping. This is the Romans. Now the Romans were not known as great thinkers like the Greeks were. They weren't philosophers. They were engineers. They're more known for their roads and and their military. So here you can see there's an element of mechanization here. You've got a horizontal bar. You've got a press here. This is where the grapes would have been put, and you've got a screw. I'm not sure exactly how this would work, but I can only imagine you would turn the screw, and that would press whatever this weight is down on the grapes. So instead of human labor, you're taking advantage of the mechanical advantage of a tool. So this is added. This is what I was talking about, the technology writ large. So this is already an adaptation, a technological advancement. But the other things are still the same. You're crushing the grapes. You got this juice coming in here. It's fermenting. It's going into it. It's got a little drain here. People are going to obviously this is a model, but people are going to put this wine into amphorae, and the rest is pretty simple. But it's technological step by step. It gets more and more less hand done. So there's more mechanization. This just a picture. This is a shipwreck. This is a Roman shipwreck with wine off a Greek island in the Aegean. It had 6,000 amphorae, believe it or not. The ship was 111 feet long. It's the 4th oldest Roman wreck known to historians. So this, you can even see the shape of the boat, kind of a fat boat, so to speak, that was more for holding cargo than being being fast. Now, this is a famous statue. This is the Dying Gall from the Capitoline Museum. And I want to talk about Gaul before more about the Romans. The Gauls were not known for their production of wine. They drank mead, fermented honey. They didn't. But eventually, the elites did start to drink wine, and they specifically did not dilute their wine. They drank it straight, which kind of shocked the Romans. The Romans did it just like the Greeks did. But they didn't care. The Romans would sell it. All the more money they can make. There was a price basically for I think I don't know the size of the amphorae, but there's a Roman writer from Sicily who wrote that the trade-off between an amphorae of wine, the Gauls would pay 1 slave for an amphorae of wine. So you can that seems like they're paying a lot for that wine, and it was seen as a luxury good. The other thing that the Gauls can be credited for is the invention of the wooden barrel. So basically, where you have staves and a barrel, and the staves are the wood pieces that make up the barrel, and that it's bound by metal rings on top and bottom to keep it together. It's the Gauls who invented this. So in the Mediterranean, you're using clay amphorae. In Northern Europe, where the Gauls are, there's maybe not as much clay, but there are lots of trees. So there's an economic aspect to it. There must also have been a labor aspect to it. It was just simpler to organize, to move them about. And there is also records of the Gauls buying wine from amphorae from the Romans, pouring them into barrels, sealing the barrels, and then shipping those barrels up to other areas in Europe adjacent and selling them for other things that they wanted. They were kind of middlemen, so to speak.
Mark, question.
Yeah, please.
So we know that the Carthaginians, which were the colony of Phoenicians, made their way to Spain and Gaul, therefore to say, and Hamilcar Barca, who was the father of the Hannibal, in fact, lived and, they created mines in there. In fact, Hannibal didn't really see Carthage up until later in his life. And so to me, the question is, the Phoenicians were you could say the initiators of the wine in that region. Why didn't they bring it to the Gaul? Or do you know the answer to that? And then why did Romans bring it, not the Phoenicians? That's what the question is, apparently.
Well, the only thing I could say to that is that the Phoenicians tended to stick to the southern part of the Mediterranean.
Right. No, that makes sense.
No, but also I don't think they penetrated Gaul very far. They only were mostly in Spain and just maybe very, very south of France. So but they didn't really went that far while Romans conquered the Gaul.
Yeah, and the other thing, for instance, it was the Greeks that founded the modern city of Marseille in France, and they called it Massilia, and that was about 500, 550 BCE, and it was specifically a city in Asia Minor, the name of which escapes me, that was under pressure from the Persians, and they were refugees, and they must have known about southern France. They went there, and they're the ones who started that city, and I'm sure they brought vine clippings with them in order to start a viticulture there, and it kind of grew from there a little bit. But it's the Romans who really brought this. They started trading, and obviously, eventually with Julius Caesar, the Romans conquered Gaul, and that's when the commerce really started, because eventually Gallic culture became Romanized, particularly in the south first, but in northern areas also. The town of Bordeaux started growing wine around 73 AD. It was the Romans started Burgundy in Champagne. They also went into the Rhineland. And it was one of the things, the Roman army, as they went along, they would bring clippings of vines and they would plant them along their routes. But the main idea was to have vines such that the soldiers in their barracks that were occupation troops could plant the vines and have wine for themselves. They wouldn't have to import it, expensively from Rome or from the closest Roman city. And that in and of itself, I'll talk about later, that in and of itself had an effect on the genetics of the grapes, because you got to remember, grapes, this Vitis vinifera, it's from the Caucasus. It's been there for millions of years. That's where it's evolved. That's where its best environment is. But man would take these clippings and put them somewhere else. And anytime you're taking a plant out of its natural environment, it's not going to do well. But some of them will. It's kind of, so the man would take that kind of natural, or the natural selection, so to speak, or human selection, and pick out the vines that, oh, well, these vines didn't do well in this new climate, but these guys did. We'll take the seeds from the successor ones, the successful vines, and replant those next year. And that would be done and again and again and again. And you got to remember grapes, by this time had adjusted to the Mediterranean, but then the Romans start taking them, up into northern central France, and the Mediterranean is hot and it's dry. The more north you get in what modern is France, Bordeaux or Burgundy, you're getting into wetter regions, you're getting into colder regions. So only the best, grapes or vines would survive that new environment. But like humans would take the best ones and then plant those again. And then that would change. That was a way that the humans inadvertently were selecting for the best genetics. And that would be then taken for the next generation and the next generation. And that's why you start with one mother grape, so to speak, in the Caucasus. And today we have probably in the low thousands of different kinds of grapes. What they'll call varietals. When I mean grapes, I mean Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, all that kind of stuff. Those are all different grapes, and they all have one common ancestor from the Caucasus. But over the millennia, these grapes adjusted to the local climates and were eventually more successful because of it. If you were to take Pinot Noir and try to go with somewhere in southern Italy, it's not going to do well. And it's why only certain grapes can be found in certain areas, because if anybody's ever done any gardening, let's say if anyone's ever grown tomatoes, for example, think about where a tomato's from. Tomatoes are from Central America. They like a lot of sun, they like a lot of heat. So if you put tomatoes in northern Minnesota, they're not going to do as well. But they do well in Spain, they do well in southern Italy, they do well in other places. But there are different varietals. They're called heirloom tomatoes. And there are certain heirloom tomatoes that go well with wherever you live. And if you want to grow tomatoes in an area that isn't particularly good for the original progenitor of tomatoes, you choose an heirloom that is appropriate for your climate. And the same thing goes with wine.
One quick thing here. I have a bottle of Retsina, if you can see right now.
You have a bottle of what?
Of Retsina, the green, the Greek.
So you have a bottle of Retsina with you. Wow.
Yeah. So there you go. So I have it like normal times, maybe twice a year, where I have like a dinner, kind of a fun dinner thing when hopefully we all open up. I'll invite you guys over and we'll just, kind of a potluck, Middle Eastern, Mediterranean potluck kind of thing.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
The other thing I forgot to mention with the Romans is the Romans also made an advancement in terms of writing and disseminating the knowledge. And true to the Romans, they stole it. They stole it from the Carthaginians, who had written this down. And it was a book, 2 books, written by the Carthaginians on how to engage in viticulture and how to make wine. When the Romans eventually conquered Carthage, they found these books, they translated them, and it was written into Latin by a Sicilian Roman, and it was disseminated. It was basically, it's basically 101 things you didn't know about winemaking, but were afraid to ask, so to speak. And it's the very kind of basis sort of thing. And this is where, one of the first times in history where this knowledge is written down. And is actually these books, these Roman translations, were some of the first books that were printed with Gutenberg's press, which also has a connection with wine. We'll get into that later. Now into
Excuse me, Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, please,
you.
please.
I was just wondering, like in reading of all kinds of Roman literature, I recall that the top wine in Roman Empire and
Oh yes,
was
yes, I forgot.
Falernian, right?
Yes,
Are you going to talk about that?
Yes, I thank you very much. I had totally forgotten about that.
It was like supposed to be like the top. The soldiers, they drank cheap wine, but the elite, the senatorial rank, the Falernian wine was the most famous at the time and mentioned many times. And I believe it's kind of like lost nowadays.
Yeah, when you're, I mean, in all deference to ground pounders, you don't give them the good stuff. You know, they can drink, they can drink your pedestrian wine, and they'll be happy with that. What you mentioned was a wine called Phylernum, and that was from southern Italy on the Italian mainland. It was from an area that has a volcano, so it was next either on the slopes or near a volcano.
And
it was
Campania, right? It's
probably Campania,
yeah, Campania, and probably the Vesuvius or things like that.
It might. I couldn't find
I don't know exactly.
The name of it. Certainly, Vesuvius is in Campania. They still make wine there. Good wine, not as good as Etna, but still good wine. And so it might very well be the Falernian might still be from that region, from Vesuvius. This is a wine. It was a sweet white wine. Julius Caesar drank it when it was 70 years old. Caligula drank it the same vintage. So this is something that lasted for decades and decades and decades. It was something also, if you ever Google Italian wine scandal, you'll come up with a bunch of different scandals. One that dates back to 2009. There is a region most everyone will know, Chianti, DOCG. There are different levels of quality of Chianti. And Brunello di Montalcino. Okay, this is a very small appellation, so it's high quality, good wine. And what was happening is the Italian authorities were noticing that there is a lot more volume this year than there should be of this wine, than what is normally produced. So what did they do is they figured, okay, something's fishy is going on here. And they did DNA studies on the wine, believe it or not. And what they found was, because every grape has its own DNA and they can be distinguished. What they found was that some producers in Tuscany here, in Chianti and Montalcino, were adding wines from the south, and the DNA of those grapes are different than the grapes that are allowed in these appellations, and that's fraud. People go to jail for this. And the same thing happened with this wine, this Falernian in ancient Rome. There was more of it, more wine that was labeled Falernian than was actually produced. And they would be put on an amphora, and who's to know? Who's to know that it really came from that area? What they basically did was make a wine similar, maybe from a nearby region, but it was similar. And if you're a Roman, merchant, or you just happen to be rich or something like that, you wouldn't necessarily have tried the real stuff, so you wouldn't actually know. So fraud is very easy, and there was so wine fraud, it goes back quite a way. And the other thing about that, I also forgot to mention about the Romans that makes them different from the Greeks and anyone else, is they modified, or shall we say, adulterated their wine. And I don't mean to say it in a pejorative sense, but they liked their wine. They would add spices to them. They would add expensive spices, things like cinnamon. You can imagine how expensive that would have been for the Romans. Black pepper, ginger. They would add herbs like thyme and lavender, and they would add honey, either before the fermentation to increase the alcohol, or after the fermentation to increase the sweetness, and both of which would act as preservatives. To my knowledge, no one really did that so much. It was really a Roman thing. I've been lucky enough to be in a Roman restaurant twice in the German city of Trier, and I've tasted it. It's interesting. It's not something, you know, I prefer my dry wines generally with my meals, but it was sweeter and it was herbed. It was herbaceous. There's also a winery outside of Montpellier in southwestern France that makes wine in a Roman style. The winery is on the site of a former Roman winery.
Mark,
Now,
didn't they Germans call it like Glintwein or something like that?
say again?
The Germans called it like Glintwein, something.
There is something, a German term called Landwein. It's one of the German classifications of wine, classifications of quality.
Yeah.
And Land means estate in German. And Landwein is one of the lowest qualities of German wines in the way they classify quality. The way Germans classify quality wine is they measure the sugar before fermentation. So the highest quality wine will be the wines that have the most amount of sugar before, or at the end of harvest, before fermentation. I think, and it's very precise, but it's also kind of useless. And they have names like it for Spätlese, Auslese, Beerenauslese, Eiswein, and things like that. And the more you go, the more sugar there is, or before fermentation. But it's kind of useless because it doesn't tell you how much sugar is left after fermentation. So you could have a Spätlese or an Auslese that had a lot of sugar before fermentation, but are completely dry. And that isn't necessarily written on the label. You kind of have to know the wine or ask your wine merchant, hey, is this Spätlese dry or does it have residual sugar in it? So that makes one, and another way of doing it is the way the Spanish do it. Their level of quality, so to speak, is not sugar, but it's how much the wine is spent in oak barrels. So you'll start with a Hoben, which is a young wine, then you get into Crianza, and then Reserva and Gran Reserva. And the more you go, the longer the wine has to have aged in barrel. And that's the way the Germans do it, it's the way the Spanish do it. Now we get into Middle Ages. Middle Ages are really kind of cool because in the West here, and when I'm talking Middle Ages, I'm talking Western Europe, the Roman Empire has fallen. This is after 400. There's actually a Roman writer writing about Burgundy in the year 400, stating that this region of formerly good wine it's gone downhill in 400. The wines aren't nearly as good as it used to be. And you think 400, what was going on in 400 in eastern, northern France, but barbaric invasions. One can imagine how that might be disruptive to the production of wine. Of course, they've recovered in the 1600 years since then, but already people were seeing, oh, this stuff isn't so good anymore. They were talking about this sort of thing. So what happened with the Middle Ages? You have the crash of the Roman Empire. Trade collapses. You know, it's just not happening anymore. People do not move anymore. They're stuck where they are, and they're also drinking the wine from their region. They can't import sweet wines from Sicily or Cyprus anymore. Not in the early Middle Ages. They're drinking the stuff that is produced in their nearby region. And that's one of the things that increases this geographic diversity of grapes. So these grapes are century after century are becoming more and more adapted to even smaller areas. And they're starting, this guy's a monk, I love this image. The monks were the Cistercian monks and Benedictine monks. They were getting more and more land granted to them by people who wanted to make sure they could get in heaven. And sometimes this included vineyards. They would, the monks would have an allotment of wine. And if it was in Belgium, they would have an allotment of beer, the Trappist monks. But others areas where we're talking about wine, they would have an allotment of wine each day. And if they had excess wine, well, they could sell that wine and make money. And if they made really good wine, well, they could sell that to nobles and kings and make even more money. And they got rich. And the monks, say in Burgundy, like the Cistercian monks, they were known for taking quality of wine very seriously. They were getting analytical about wine. Specifically in Burgundy, this is the birthplace of grapes like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. These grapes are from Burgundy. That was, again, that's genetic diversity. What the monks were paying attention to is, where does this wine, they were paying attention to the soil, with the French term terroir, is like from a basic terra, earth. It makes a big difference where the wine is from. It makes a difference in the taste and how it smells. If you go to Burgundy, it's like that soil went through a blender. It's very, 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 very diverse. You can taste a wine from one side of the road that will taste vastly different than a wine from the other side of the road, because it has a different soil. Even though it's the same yeast, even though it's the same grape, but the soil makes a difference. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on my last slide with Bordeaux. This is the starting of this idea of, you just can't plant vines anywhere. You have to pay attention to it. And that's if you're looking for quality. Now, one of the things that happened in the Middle Ages, let's say this Middle Ages start around 400, 500, something like that. Around 800, there's something that started, it's called the medieval warm period. It lasted until about 1300 roughly. So what happens is, the climate gets just a little bit warmer. It had been cooler before. This results in longer growing seasons. More wine can be made. It's more, the climate was more stable. You have less cold snaps, you have less frosts, you have bigger harvests, you have more people. The population in 3 centuries in Europe rose from 30 million to 60 million in just 3 centuries. It doubled because climate. You're going to have more food. You're going to have more population. More population, you need more food. It kind of goes in a cycle like this. And you had obviously better harvests. You also had fewer Viking raids. Now there's just basically more stability. You have the growth of cities. And this is one period where you have a greater stratification of society. You have artisans, you have knights, you have nobles, you have a priestly class, you have merchants, you have artisans. And each one of them humans like to make them differentiate themselves from other humans. And one way might be fashion, the way they dress, more expensive clothes. Another way is, look at the expensive wine that I'm drinking. The wine I drank is sweet, and it's from Cyprus or something like that. That this shows how successful and rich I am. You also had wine that was made in areas where it's not suitable to make wine these days, or for centuries. Think places like Brittany, northern France, Normandy, Flanders. They made wine there. Can't do that nowadays, though. But that's a different topic about global warming. The English made wine all the way up to northern England in Durham. They made wine. That's the absolute limit. Then it came later. Then when it got cold again, the English had to stop. And it's only now in the 20th century, and particularly the 21st century, that in southern England they're making bubbly again, which is a cold climate sort of wine. You have the reestablishment of trade in the later Middle Ages. So things were getting better during the Middle Ages, kind of recovering from the loss of the Roman Empire. And part of that transportation was sea transportation. So you have a different kind of boat. It's called a cog. It's a fat boat. It's not fast, but it's stable and can hold a lot of cargo. And by this time, by the Middle Ages, the technology has shifted from amphorae to barrels. People didn't use amphorae anymore. And a way of judging the size of a ship, size of a cog, is to talk in tons, T-U-N-S, which means a barrel. So if you have a cog that is 200 tons, that means it can hold 200 barrels of wine. And to this day, we talk about tonnage of ships to this day. It's the same sort of vocabulary. You also had cities like Venice, the growth of cities. northern Italy with Genoa, Venice, Florence, Siena, all these cities grew richer and richer and more populated, they could afford wines from further away. They could afford the spices and things like this. And one thing to note, there was a bit of a superiority with amphorae, is that when an amphora was sealed, there's no more oxygen. The wine doesn't age there's no oxygen exchange with the amphorae. But with barrels, like you see this guy, there is oxygen exchange. So in an amphora, you could keep that wine sealed, and it's going to age, well, as long as the wine was meant to be aged. When it comes to barrel, you put your wine in barrel, that wine will only last a year. So in the Middle Ages, they were drinking the entire harvest with 1 year. The only exception would be what went into vinegar, which means sour wine, or spiced wine. So at the end of the year, that's when they would be drinking spiced wine because it kind of covered up the bad taste. And today we have mulled wine, which we kind of enjoy, especially after skiing.
And
Mark,
so
Aaron has a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
a couple of things. I know we talked, it was about a month ago back to about the Hanseatic League. So I just put a thing in on Lubeck. So Lubeck makes French wine organically going back to the 13th century because of those French Burgund monks that came there as part of the establishment of the Hanseatic League. And the clogged ships were really the standard transport ship that the Hanseatic League basically developed and standardized on, and the tonnage also from that. So it's sort of interesting how you can sort of link all of that back to sort of that explosion of both the Hanseatic League, but also wine as part of that currency. And you talked about mull wine, and this is the one I make for myself and my kids, if you guys can see. It's the standard German kind of mull wine that you can get at the store. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but I know you're going to talk about mull wine now, I think. I don't know if you see that or not, but
What's the name of it?
Yeah, we see.
Sorry.
yeah, it's the Nuremberg one. So it's the Glee Wine. So it's basically just this like kind of a light wine, and you can get it basically you get it, you heat it up, you don't boil it, but you heat it up. I throw a little extra cinnamon in, and then like a slice of orange in there, so it sort of heats the orange up, and and even a little touch of orange juice even on it too, and kind of like it's like basically a market wine. If you go around Germany during market time, you can get a version of that. I sort of trick mine up a little bit, but
Especially Christmas.
yeah. So I mean exactly. So I kind of do it starting in Thanksgiving-ish time, like basically when it starts getting cold, and then and so I usually get like 4 of these. They sort of last the winter-ish. And I mean, this last year was a little different, but I mean, but it's good. It's cheap. It's like 10, 15 bucks. You can make your own too. There's great recipes for it.
Oh yeah, that's the best kind to make your own.
Yeah. So what I actually kind of do is fuse them. I make my own, and then I'll throw some of this in, give it a little bit of extra zip. But it's a mull wine, spices, kind of, clearly, for people who were cold and broke. So and the fact that it's so flexible to make. So
it's also the origin of sangria. It's basically the same thing.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. So yeah, I was actually going to go there, but that's great.
The last thing I was going to mention about the Middle Ages, there's a lawyer from Bologna, Pietro Crescenzi. Sorry for the bad Italian. He retired to a farm outside of Bologna, and he wrote a farming manual, kind of like the Carthaginian one that was translated into Roman. But this was written between 1304 and 1309. And this got even more specific. So he was saying, if you want to plant this grape, it's very vigorous in this soil. You want to plant that grape, you have to be patient. You have to watch it, or you're planting another grape. Don't expect a large volume. It's not going to produce much. Things like that. You got really specific, and of course it was for that particular region. But it's another thing is that people are increasing their knowledge. They're writing it down, and the human body of knowledge about wine is it just increases. And again, this was another book that was printed, one of the first books to get printed. This I wanted to throw up, and it's not the greatest one. Ideally, if we had a PowerPoint slide the size of a wall, I could show you the genetic drift of Vitis vinifera. This one happens to start with Traminer. And it shows the genetic drift of like Riesling is how it relates back to Traminer. This is, so basically Riesling is a kind of a grandson of Traminer. And it was basically, this is the genetic drift that I was talking about before. People take one grape, take it another place. So you see Traminer, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, they're related. These two went to Burgundy. Semillon went to Bordeaux. Sauvignon Blanc went to Bordeaux. Chenin Blanc went to the Loire. Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, they went to Bordeaux again. And see, you can see Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon are related. The word Sauvignon relates to the word sauvage, which means wild. So this is basically wild white, and this is Cabernet wild. And I'm not sure what Cabernet refers to exactly, but there's a story in this word Traminer. Traminer is from the Sud Tyrol, basically the southern Italian Alps. The grape name is, again, Traminer. And when it went, people took it across the Alps to the north to southern Germany. And that climate is different than the Traminer from northern Italy. The genetics changed. And what happened with that wine is that the wine tasted different. It had a little spiciness to it. And when I mean spiciness, I don't mean capsaicin, I mean kind of an allspice flavor to it, maybe a little bit of nutmeg. And the German word for spiciness is Gewürz. And that became Gewürztraminer, which is a different grape now, which is also, it's grown in mostly, to my knowledge, in Alsace. And that's how that's an example of this genetic drift, so to speak, that I wanted to kind of come across. Now we have the Renaissance. So this is a Caravaggio. There are two paintings of Bacchus. Left is Caravaggio, and then the one on the right is Guido Reni. I'm not going to cover the Renaissance too much, but one of the things that happened in the Renaissance is the kind of a renewal of ritual that didn't quite exist so much in the Middle Ages, but particularly in the early Middle Ages, and a return to Greco-Roman mythology. So hence the Bacchus. You started to get more rituals, kind of like the Greeks. It wasn't quite the same as more of a commerce, more of an everyday sort of thing that it had been in the Middle Ages. You have these festivals where for one day, there would be no class distinctions whatsoever. Everybody's goal was to get absolutely drunk as much as possible. One person, for example, for one festival, one person would get, quote unquote, the bean. There'd be a cake. And this, you still do this in France, in New Orleans, they do this with king cake. There'd be a little porcelain bean in it. And then the cake is just, given to people. And the person who gets the bean, quote unquote, the piece of porcelain is the king of the day, king of Mardi Gras. And that person has to get comatose drunk. And they didn't have a choice about it. And with the fact that there are no class distinctions, it allowed a lower class person to mock someone from the high class. They could do things that they would never able to do on the other 364 days of the year. So this was a kind of a social release of tensions. People could blow off steam, so to speak.
It's similar to Saturnalia, right? From the Roman.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. It's similar to the Greek Dionysus. Dionysus, exactly. So it was a return to some Greco-Roman culture that had been lost in the Middle Ages. Now we're getting into the Enlightenment and science, and specifically to Gutenberg. Now the picture I put here on the upper left, this is called a wine cake. This is spent grapes that are just kind of congealed together because they've been pressed under a lot of pressure. And this also, you can imagine the press would have come up from the top here and then pressed on the top. The juice would have run off and goes to fermentation. These are white grapes. And you can tell that there's an impression here, a physical impression here with a little rise here. So this is the inverse image of the press itself, okay? Well, there's a certain German gentleman here, right here in Mainz by the name of Gutenberg, who's, it's a wine region as well in Germany. And he happened to see this wine press and he had a kind of a eureka moment and thought, oh, wait a minute, we could use the same technology for movable type and easily print things. Wouldn't that be cool? And the first press was a wine press. The first print press was a wine press. So you've got a transfer of technology from making wine to a huge leap in technology for the written word. And it's from that, the modern world is very much based on the inexpensiveness of the written word. And you can see this column here. You can see this column. It's a corkscrew, and it's turned just not dissimilar to the old Roman thing press that we showed before. And this is basically the same sort of technology. Now, one of the things that happened with books before this print, and what happened was that books were highly expensive. You had to be very rich and noble, perhaps, to have any books. They were extremely precious. They were like jewels in terms of how carefully people treated them. What happens with this is that the price with the Gutenberg press, the price of books crashes. So the price of information it crashes, which is a good thing. Beforehand, with the expensive books, there are only few people who could read at all. So there wasn't a lot of pressure for more people to read. Now you've got this opportunity for people to read more, and people discover, oh, I can't read this. I need glasses. So these lenses had existed for a century or two beforehand, but they were expensive. What happens with this is that you've got a flood of books, a bunch of people who said, I'd love to read this, but I need glasses. And that gave the impetus for lens making to make it more cheap, the manufacturer. And that's where you get into lenses, telescopes, and microscopes. So you've got a leap of technology from wine to press to lenses. So that opened up the lenses, opened up the microscopic world and the cosmological world. And now humans could see the planets, they could see faraway galaxies, they could look at a drop of water and see all the life that is in that. So this went from one wine press is a huge expansion of human vision and human knowledge and acquisition of more and more knowledge.
Yeah, Mark, can I add something? And yeah, that's absolutely correct with the optics, but it doesn't even stop there. Like, there's a lot of researchers believe that the printing press is responsible for everything today, including the internet, getting a man to the moon, and all in between. So I think that's awesome that wine made this possible.
Exactly. Yeah. And one guy saying, hey, wait a minute, what if we do this with that, sort of thing. No one, sometimes innovations come out from someone making a connection between two different things that nobody had made before.
Totally. That's awesome.
Okay, so getting towards the end here, this is Louis Pasteur. He is the guy, and so by this time we've had a couple of centuries of lenses. His working career, spanned the second half of the 19th century. This is in the 1860s, I believe. He was a scientist. He is responsible, obviously, for pasteurization of milk, but he's also responsible for the scientific discovery, and this relates to the wine, of fermentation. So until this time, nobody understood what fermentation was, which is one reason, cynically, I'll say that it was connected with religion, because no one knew. You can thank the gods for fermentation. He discovered what this was, and that this was yeast that was doing this. And he used it because of this technology. And one of the things that this represents kind of the combination of technology and wine. So there's these increasingly large leaps of knowledge of people and of the world around them. Now, any sort of history of wine would be missing if it did not include Phylloxera. Phylloxera was a absolutely huge crisis in the world of wine. It's an ecological disaster, basically. If you ever heard of the Australians importing this plant or that frogs or something like that, or rabbits and things like that, or kudzu in the southern US, you import something from one continent, put it in another, and you're just asking for trouble. What happened with this, the consequence, for example, was 90% of vines in France were killed by this insect. And from there, it spread to Italy, Germany, Spain. Wine was on the brink of extinction, the vines were. What it was is this Phylloxera is the name of a louse that comes from North America. The story apparently is a couple of botanists in England brought over some vines, some American vines that make horrible wine, but they wanted to play around with it. They're botanists. In the 19th century, there was a lot of experimentation. And these vines came with this Phylloxera louse. And a couple of them got out, crossed the channel, and started chowing down on the roots of vines in France. And the vine would just die because the vines in North America had evolved over millions of years with Phylloxera, and they had defenses against it. The vines in Europe had no defense. They'd never seen this animal before, so they had no defenses. And it completely killed the vines. And everybody, they were tearing their hair out, these vineyard owners, just like they saw their entire livelihood dying like that, and they didn't know what was going on. They may not even have known there was this bug, but it was science that came to the rescue. At first, they noticed that if a particular vineyard was flooded, well, the bugs would die. And that kind of worked, but most vineyards are on slopes of hills, and it's kind of hard to flood a hill. The other thing was they would also bury toads. I don't know if alive or dead, but they would bury them thinking the poison of the toad would kill the Phylloxera. And you can imagine how successful that was. But eventually scientists came up with this, and they realized what was going on. The photo here on the lower right is this sad girl, and what she's drinking is called absinthe, or the green fairy. This is it's a distillate from Algeria that French soldiers colonizing Algeria would drink. They brought it back. They kind of liked it. It's basically the same as ouzo or raka. Why did that become really popular in the late 19th century? Because there was no wine. It was being destroyed. So they had to drink something, and that's why absinthe became really popular. And this is an Impressionist painting. And so the cause of the problem came from the US. The solution also came from the US. It was a French scientist who came up with this. Basically what they did was they imported the vines from the US. They took the roots and grafted European vines on top of American roots. So the roots, they combined the goodness of the grapes, of the European grapes, with the advantage of the American roots that were more or less immune to Phylloxera, and boom, you've got a wine industry again. And to this day, almost all wine, even in North America, are the fruit of this combination. Everywhere in Europe, these are every wine from Burgundy to the Rhineland to Bordeaux to Chianti are on descendants of American roots. And this is how this was done. There are a few places, and they'll call this wines that were not grafted on. These are called pre-Phylloxera. Very few places. There's some places in Chile, they happen to have sandy soils. The Phylloxera doesn't like sandy soils, so they didn't attack those vines. There's some vines on Mount Etna that are pre-Phylloxera. There are a few places in Italy that are pre-Phylloxera. Just basically, Phylloxera didn't get that far and to kill the vines. So that was something where science saved wine. So a man's knowledge was sufficient enough to save the vine. So almost at the end here, this is something to say where wines are from. So there are two ways to measure this. It's between almost all wine, Vitis vinifera, is between the 50th and the 30th parallel north and south. And it's also between where the mean temperature, yearly temperature is between 10 Celsius and 20 Celsius. And all these purple areas are where the good wines are made from. There are a few other places there. It's not including China. That this is before. The Chinese are starting to make some wine of questionable quality, but it's improving all the time. But it kind of goes to show you can't just make wine anywhere. And you notice now the Nile River Delta is not part of that. Although there is wine grown in Lebanon, in Israel, but also elevation will make things cooler, so that can change things. This area of the river, it's probably the Finger Lakes in New York. These are lakes that are cool. The water cools the area, so that will help in a continental sort of climate. The other thing about this is a picture of a mission. So the Spanish are responsible for the first dispersion of grapes in the New World. And this was connected with the religion. These missions, kind of just like the Roman barracks, they needed wine, linked with the Eucharist, things called. And that started with the Spanish Empire from Tierra del Fuego up to California and Florida. Then later on in the 19th century, people started to import more and more grapes or varietals from Europe. There were grapes in the Western Hemisphere, but they made absolutely horrible wine. It was so horrible that pioneers wouldn't drink it. These people were hungry for wine, for alcohol, and they wouldn't drink this stuff. It was that bad. Thomas Jefferson took European vines and planted them in Virginia, and they rotted. The soil, it just wasn't possible at that time. Nowadays, Virginia does make wine. They make decent wine, but it's because human knowledge has advanced and the technology and techniques that they can deal with the heat and humidity of Virginia that Thomas Jefferson couldn't do. So you have grapes that were like Malbec grape going into Mendoza. You have French grapes imported into California for the first time in the LA basin. So right now, all of the grapes that are growing in Napa and Sonoma are the grandchildren of the grapes that were originally grown in LA, which is kind of a little tidbit. They were also, the Huguenots brought them into South Africa. The English, British brought them into Australia. They're on New Zealand. And that's how this Vitis vinifera grew and expanded all over the world. Last thing, or second to last thing, is the technology. Just wanted to give a sense of technology in wine. This is yet another fuzzy picture. This is a cellar in Bordeaux that I've not been to, but I want to say technology in advance. We've got drones now in vineyards. What they're doing is taking pictures that were usually taken or previously taken by planes, and much more cheaply now with drones. And if you get a bird's eye view of a vineyard, you can tell where the vines are more vigorous and less vigorous, which areas need more water, which ones have too much water. And you can even, with the light spectrum, you can tell which vines are more efficient at photosynthesis. So you can get the efficiency is just being ratcheted up just that much more. This is a mechanical harvester. One notion, I would say, notion of quality is hand-picked grapes, and some vineyards will tell you our grapes were picked by hand. Most they usually are, but in places like Australia and New Zealand, they don't have a source of cheap labor like they do in California, so they have to go buy machines, and that's the only way they can do it. This is a kind of a lab photo with the wine. This is a hydrometer after fermentation. So this is a way of measuring the alcohol level of wine. In a lot of vineyards, go to California, and a lot of vineyards will have a little lab where they test things. They'll test sugar levels and things like that on their own. So it's becoming much more scientific. This is a quick picture of Bordeaux. One of the concepts I was talking about before is something called terroir. And so it's where the soil is really important. You can divide Bordeaux in left bank, right bank. So this is the Dordogne River that comes from the Massif Central. This is the Garonne river that comes from the Pyrenees. And this is the Gironde, is the combination of the two. This soil over here is rockier. The left bank has more Cabernet Sauvignon, less Merlot. And the reason is Cabernet Sauvignon likes a drier soil. So if you have something that has more gravel in it, the water is going to drain. It's going to be drier. Cabernet Sauvignon likes it. The areas with more clay that has not as much rock, Merlot likes a wetter soil. That's where they plant Merlot. And this here on the right in blue is limestone. Limestone, it gives a cooler soil and it retains more water. So guess what? They plant more Merlot, less Cabernet Sauvignon. And that's why it's just, I show this as just as an example of why it makes sense to have certain grapes grown on certain areas, certain soils, as opposed to others. And this is something that's been developed for a couple of millennia. So that's the end of it. I don't know. I hope I didn't take too long. I don't know how many people were left, but if anybody has any questions about the history or wine, I'm open.
Mark, this is Lisa. I do actually have a question for you, and it goes back to your previous slide about mechanical harvesting versus hand-picked harvest, or the one, yeah, there we go. And so I'm just curious, why is it considered better to hand pick? Is it because of the damage to the grapes? Is it because there's more crap that gets mixed with the actual grapes? What's the rationale behind that?
It's the first one. Eventually we'll get robots that can pick grapes as well and faster than humans, but we're not there yet. The mechanical harvesters that I'm familiar with, what they do is they actually shake the vine and the grapes come off. It's kind of a rough way to handle the grapes. And one of the things with wine, the quality of the fruit matters very much so. So if you have bruised wine, a bruised grape, a bruised grape will start to oxidize immediately. If you ever cut an apple in half, it doesn't take long for that apple to start to turn brown. That's oxygen working on it. And if you're trying to make a quality wine, that bruising will give off flavors to your wine, which is one reason why if you ever see pictures of crates of grapes when they're harvesting, they're all rather shallow. They're not that deep because they used to make them deeper for efficiency reasons, but they found out that the grapes on the bottom started to be crushed by the grapes on top, and that you get juice, and that juice would start to be fermented by yeast that you don't want in there. Insects would get in there. The grapes would be bruised. You get off flavors. So this is an important thing. It's also an important reason why quality of a wine is connected with vinification right next to where the grapes are harvested. If that answers your question.
Sure does. Thank you.
I'm sorry. One thing I forgot. In Bordeaux, I couldn't find a picture for this, but in Bordeaux, I've seen these machines where you would used to have people for this, and they still do this, but you'll have a what do you call it? Not a treadmill, but a conveyor belt where the grapes would go in front of people. They'll remove leaves, they'll remove branches, they'll remove mice, they'll remove bruised fruit, so the bruised fruit doesn't go in. Now, as an addition to that, a technological thing is that these grapes will grow and go past into a machine on this belt, and the machine fires a laser at this. It's not blowing, it's not the Death Star or anything like that, but it fires a laser at the grape, reads the light coming back, and if it can, whatever the technology and reading of the light that comes back, they can tell if a grape has been damaged or not, better than a human can. And what will happen if and this is done in an instant by the computer, once it detects a bruised grape, that grape is then removed by a puff of air and discarded, so it doesn't get into the fermentation.
Mark, I just well, first of all, I've been watching. Nobody have left during your whole presentation.
Oh,
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's really great. I learned a few new things, and very dynamic, well-structured presentation. Really great. I hope you'll come up with a few more presentations, some interesting ideas. But I still have that question. Maybe I have missed it a little bit. That insect that almost wiped out the wine industry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Phylloxera,
How,
yeah.
yeah. How did it? Where did it come from, and how did it all, infected everything everywhere except maybe?
It's the Americans at fault here. This Phylloxera grew. It's a North American bug, and you had a couple of English botanists who were playing around. They imported some American vines for whatever reason, and the insects came along for the ride. And they didn't know what this thing was. They didn't pay attention to it, just a bug, who cares? But it got out, just like Nutria in Louisiana or kudzu in the South. It found, hey, and this Phylloxera is like, hey, look at these vines, we can attack this. And these vines have no defenses against us. It was a huge buffet for them.
Oh, I see.
That's how it started.
Right, yeah. They couldn't swim the ocean on their own.
No, it was humans.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Sounds good.
Quick question. First of all, Mark, amazing presentation.
Thank you.
And it's my fault. I didn't market it early enough, and I guess because we moved it from Thursday, some people got lost, like Jeffrey and Marika and other 4 people that wanted to go Thursday. I apologize. That was my fault again.
You can never get everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to toast for Mark's great presentation, and I just have one question.
Please.
So yesterday I went to the wine store, wanted to get something. So I got a clerk telling me that Napa's wines are more prevalent over French wines, which is weird to me.
What do you mean? What do you mean prevalent?
Prevalent, semi-sweet wine. He goes, if you go to Napa, there's a $30, $40 wines, while the ones from France, like Louis, I have a bottle here. Let me tell you where it was, semi-sweet wine. And I had to get a kosher wine because my family only drinks kosher. It's called Louis, and it's Cabernet Sauvignon. And they said it's preferential to get more Napa Valley. How is it Napa Valley is more prevalent over French wines these days? I have no idea.
What if you're conveying what the guy said? The guy said what the guy said was utter bullshit.
That's what I thought.
This gets into the area of my personal opinions. Okay, so it's take anything that I say in this with a grain of salt. Preferences for you can't say that one region necessarily makes better wine. There are extremes. Yeah, sure. I mean, Bordeaux makes better wine than the Finger Lakes. Yeah, Burgundy makes better wine than Mendocino. Yeah, but a local person from Mendocino may prefer. It's all about what you prefer as an individual, and it's also it's about different styles of wine. The wines in Napa, like 99%, are Bordeaux varietals for the most part. It's Cabernet Sauvignon, it's Merlot. I'm sure they make some Pinot Noir. They make some Sauvignon Blanc is another Bordeaux varietal. But in the same way that the Romans took these vines, Mediterranean adapted wines, and put them up further in wetter, colder regions, when people imported vines from Europe and then started planting them in Napa, Napa is a hot region compared to Bordeaux. And when you think about, one thing to think about wines and your preference in wine, the first thing I would tell anybody is start to pay attention to the climate of that region and pay attention to see whether you like wines from a warm region or a cool region. Warmer regions will give a heavier wine and more alcoholic. And in a pejorative way, people will call them fruit bombs. People will say that of Napa wines and Barossa in Australia, things like that. If you go to Napa, you go west from Napa to Sonoma, there you're more under the influence of the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean in that area is cold. The average temperature of the Pacific there is around 55 Fahrenheit. And that acts as a huge air conditioner. And basically you have cold water, that means cold air. Cold air means that the grapes, when they're growing into fruition, will hold more acidity. If you ever taste a grape, in the early part of the season, it's a terribly acidic, it has no flavor and there's no sugar or anything like that. You taste a grape at the end of the season, there's more sugar, more flavor, but less acidity. In a cold region, those grapes will retain more of their acidity than in a warm region. And my preference in wines, I like wines with a lot of acidity. So you can imagine, do the math. I don't like wines from Napa at all. I do like some wines from Sonoma, and it's also something, it's depends on the climate. So obviously, it also depends on the winemaker. If you harvest earlier, you're going to have wines that will have retained more of their acidity than if you harvest later. So there's climate, there's the human intervention of what, the style that they're looking for. It's all about taste, basically. Some people will love Napa wines. I've seen, some people go for Napa wines that are $300. I would be more satisfied with a Bordeaux at $20.
Yes. So, and that's why if anybody has a wine, or let's toast to Mark's presentation, it was amazing.
Well, thank you.
Any questions, go ahead and ask.
Quick question. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, because I know you have a very formal experience too, and sort of how scoring works, appearance, aroma, body, taste, finish, all those type of things, and just how professionals look at it, people with your kind of experience, and then obviously like the rest of us who don't have that same experience, things that we could sort of think about differently going forward.
Sure. Well, I'll answer the first part in an opinion sense.
Sure.
Scoring with numbers is absolute bullshit. The way I would explain it is, the reason people came up with numbers, and this is predominantly the fault of Robert Parker. It's good for people who know nothing about wines, who want a simple way to they go into a wine shop. There are 300 bottles. They think, I don't know what I want. This is a simple way for them to choose a wine. It works. But the more you know about wine, the less you need a quantitative measurement. And plus, for Christ's sakes, this is Robert Parker who, he tastes so much wine. His palate is absolutely burnt. It's trashed. So he needs wines with a huge amount of flavor for him to even taste them. So he likes overblown wines, basically. But he's been highly successful. I mean, he's not a stupid guy by any means. He started with a newsletter, a wine newsletter, and he happened to be spot on with the 82 Bordeaux vintage. He told people, his subscribers, buy, and it was the vintage of the century. To put numbers on wine is similar to putting numbers on film. And let's say if I were to do this and I ranked all films with a number, The Godfather, it's a 96. Star Wars, it's a 72. Does that make any sense whatsoever? No. The people would ask, well, what do you know about good films? Maybe I prefer Star Wars. So that sort of thing is it has its uses, so to speak, but don't take it too seriously. And also when it comes to the ranking, the quantitative ranking, pay attention to who's doing that ranking, because they're ranking it according to their own tastes, and who knows if their taste is your taste. It probably is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You have to know. The other thing is with numbers is that they get inflated. The wineries will make sure that they'll make sure that their wine gets a good rating. And the other thing is that good wines are not necessarily expensive wines at all. Sometimes it's correlated, but by no means all the time by any means. So if anything, I would pay more attention to the name of the distributor. after the climate, hot or cool, look at the distributor. There's one called Robert Kasher. He specializes in good value wines from France. And then the other ones, Louis Dressner is another one. If you get a wine, you see that importer, that distributor, it's a good value. Try that as a criteria. Now, in terms of how experts will judge a wine, there's a methodology to that. And you do that by, in different stages according to your senses. When you're judging a wine, first you'll judge it with your eyes. And particularly if you're tasting it blind, you don't know what it is, you don't know where it's from, which is the right way to do it. You look at the body of the wine. So if it's white, you look how clear is it? Is it lighter? Is it darker? Is it because it's oxidized? Is it because it had time in oak barrels that were charred? Is it, if you look at a red wine, is it a paler color? Is it a darker color? If it's paler, it might be Gamay or it might be Pinot Noir from France. If it's darker, it might be a Pinot Noir, but maybe it's from Sonoma or Napa or Willamette Valley or something like that. If it's denser, more alcoholic, it's another thing. So basically, you look at the wine with your eyes, then with your nose, you smell it. You analyze. What am I smelling? What kind of flavors, fruit flavors, am I smelling that are I would call it a consequence of the fermentation? Chianti will often smell of red cherries, for example. Cabernet Sauvignon will smell of darker berries, like blackberries, blueberries. Merlot is more cherry. So, for example, when and then you taste it, and then you take, okay, what flavors am I tasting? And then the other thing with the wine, you want balance. So one of the things that's hard to make wine is the farmer, the person making, growing the grapes and then fermenting, is at the end of the harvest, you're balancing a bunch of different things. You're balancing flavor, you're balancing how much alcohol, how much sugar is in there, you're balancing the acidity, you're balancing tannin, and not always do all of those things align in a perfect way. So it's a skill of the winemaker. It's like, how much chances are they going to take? So there's a lot of balance. So when you taste a wine in the end, is the acidity in balance? Is it too acidic, or is it not acidic enough? Are there really harsh tannins, or are there not enough tannins? It's another thing. That's another difference between New World and Old World. A Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa, and one reason I don't like them is that it will have softer tannins, or even almost no tannins. Whereas a Bordeaux Cabernet Sauvignon will have tannins with nice grippy tannins. That makes the Napa wine perhaps more enjoyable to drink just by itself. But the Cabernet Sauvignon from Bordeaux wouldn't necessarily be as good by itself, but it sings when you have it with a meal, because that tannin will cut through the fat of a steak or something like that. So that's in a long, verbose way. So that's how judges will judge a wine. So the part of the certification that I do in Bordeaux, I go back every year. They take us to wineries. We have a written test and we have a tasting test. So after the written test, they give us 2 wines, and it's blind. And what we have to do is figure out, what are the grapes in this wine? What are the predominant grapes? What is the appellation of this wine? And what vintage is it? And they don't care so much about whether you nailed it or right. What they're looking for, and in order to pass, you have to say correctly, oh, I'm tasting, this kind of fruit, or I'm tasting that kind of fruit. Therefore, I think it's predominant Merlot. So therefore, I think it's a right bank, and it's lacking in acidity. So it was probably a hot year. Therefore, 03 or 05. They're looking for your ability to analyze, not just nail it, so to speak. If that makes any sense.
Great, thank you. And fantastic presentation. One of the best.
Yeah, Mark, it was great.
Yeah, it was. Go ahead, Kalisa, go ahead.
It was absolutely fabulous. But one question, if you could stay on for a second, Mark. I'm wondering what you think about the numbers that are affiliated with the vintage charts, to really kind of give you a better understanding of, during this year in Burgundy, it was a really good growing year. Do you have any opinions about the vintage charts use of numbers?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'll stay here as long as people have questions. Yeah, those kind of charts I pay much more attention to, but I will not just look at one source. I'll look at multiple sources, and I'll look at the reason why. So I won't just look at the chart and make my decision based on that. I'll look at why are they saying it's good for this reason or that reason. A lot of the charts will say drink now or put aside. Hold, yeah, exactly. Why are they saying that? And it also, the other thing is, in places like Burgundy or Bordeaux, it's not just by, say, Bordeaux 03. Yeah, there are a lot of similarities across the region, but if you're in the Médoc, which is closer to the ocean, it's going to be cooler. If you're on limestone, it's going to be cooler. So that hold, drink now decision can be drilled down to the specific winery, not just an entire region. So it requires, to the extent that you're willing to take the time, it makes sense to dig a little bit.
Cool, thanks. One other question I have is, what was the name of that distributor or something that
yeah, maybe you could post them, because you said a couple of distributors.
Greg, I already put it in there.
Yeah, the one is
on
Robert
the site or here?
Right here in the chat. Just look at
I see.
Okay, Robert Catcher, and then what was the other one?
Yeah, and just to say, Kasher is Kaschcher, and the other one is Louis Dressner, Dressner. And there are a couple other ones that I can't think of off the top of my head, but they're and if you go to your wine merchant and you say, I'm looking for wines from Robert Kascher, do you have any? If he knows what if he knows he has good knowledge, he'll tell himself, oh, this consumer knows what they're talking about, because it's very rare for your garden variety wine consumer to know something like that. That's more of a trade thing.
Okay.
Any store in New York that is a good wine stores, or that you just?
Well, I've been to a couple of good wine stores in Astoria. I can't tell you the names, unfortunately. But one thing that I did notice a difference between, say, Chicago and New York is Chicago has a much better wine selection than New York, in my book. There's stores. There's like the 800-pound gorilla of wine stores in Chicago. It's a chain, about 30 stores, called Binny's, BINNY'. The largest of which is a warehouse of wine. You could spend a lifetime trying all the wines in that store. That said, I don't actually go to that store very often. I go to a small independent wine store that you could easily see imagine in crowded New York, because it's called Independent Spirits, and the guy likes to collect kind of eclectic wines from eclectic regions, and he goes more for value. It's a place where you can find Georgian wines from Crete, wine from Moldova. There's another kind of wine. It's called it's from France. It's called Vin de France. It's a whole story unto itself, but it's wines that are in this context, wines that are grown by winemakers who don't care about the rules of the appellation, which they consider too suffocating, and they're making really cool, interesting wines. He doesn't have nearly the selection as a Binny's, but what he does have is much more interesting. So I'm not really answering your question per se, but it's certainly something to talk about. If you want to try to find wines that you like more, one of the ways to do that is to patronize select one really the best wine store you can in your area, and start talking to the owner or the floor person, and pay attention. Get that guy to know your taste. Buy a wine, drink it, go back to him and said, I didn't like that, or I did like that. And then eventually you'll start to see some patterns in the wines that you like, for example, wines from warm regions or cool regions. Do you like tannic wines, or do you like sweet wines? That's way the more data points, so to speak, you'll have, in terms of like and dislike, the more you'll start to see the patterns in what you like, and your percentage of success in choosing a wine that you like will just go up as long as you pay attention to that, to your own tastes.
Zach, one of the places I like a lot is Flatiron Wines, which is at like Broadway and 22nd.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
There's one on the 62nd. We went with Greg. I forget the name of it. It's Greg.
like
yeah, it's
Rush?
on the west side. It's
you guys go on the west side. Yeah.
yeah, it's I think 68th Street Wine, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was not Broadway. It was I think Amsterdam and 68, something like that.
But Mark, if I wanted to go and like a hitching post, would that something you recommend, or Virginia, the Martha's Vineyard, stuff like that, or this is something like it's just commercialized?
Well, Martha's Vineyard, they don't grow wine there. It's just it's an island off of Massachusetts. The Hitching Post is a restaurant in the Santa Barbara, Santa Ynez area. I would highly recommend, if you want to learn about wine, one of the greatest ways to do it is to go to a wine region. If you can pre-select, so if you've already gone through the stage of having at least a notion of the kinds of wines that you like, pick a few wineries, go to California, go to Sonoma, Napa, Mendocino, Santa Barbara, go to France, go to Germany, go to Italy, go to Spain, New Zealand, and when you go to your first winery, taste the wines, and then talk to the person on the other side of the table or whatever, who was giving you the wines to taste, and you tell them, be just honest. These are the kinds of wines that I like. Where should I go? And they'll give you some recommendations. Some might be off, some might be spot on, but it's a matter of experimentation. And if you're at a winery, it's one of the best ways to accelerate your wine knowledge, because you can talk to people, you can see the grapes, you can see the soil that they're growing on, and you can talk. Why did you grow Pinot Noir on this kind of soil? Why did you pick this clone of Pinot Noir to grow? Did you use native yeast, or did you use a commercial yeast? How many months in oak barrel did you use? Another thing with barrels, for example, a French barrel. First of all, French oak is a lot more expensive than American oak. Oak barrel, like a French oak barrel, in the beginning, new, will cost maybe 800 euros. After 3 years, that oak is exhausted. So it's kind of like making, if you have a tea bag, you make 1 cup of tea with that same tea bag. You can squeeze out a second cup, third cup, it's really weak. It's the same thing with oak barrels. Use it for the first wine, it will impart most of its flavor. And that diminishes second year, third year. By the fourth year, it imparts no flavor. You can still use it for storage or something like that. But if it's new, a French oak barrel will cost maybe 800 euros, 700 euros, depending where it's from and everything. After it's exhausted, after the fourth year or after the third year, they sell them for 10 euros.
Oh, wow.
I wish if I could have bought them at the winery that I worked at. If I could have put a wine barrel in the overhead compartment, I could have bought it for 10 euros. I could have an oak barrel in my apartment, but it just wasn't practical.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice, then you can just pay for your house with that oak barrel.
Yeah, and that's another thing, is that some of the times where the price of wine does not correlate with quality. Do you like a lot of oak in your wine? It's expensive. It's not necessarily higher quality. It's just a different style, and it happens to be expensive. The other reason, for example, wine can be expensive is the price of the land that it grew on. Napa land by square mile, square acre, the acreage is really expensive. So if you buy a winery, you're buying expensive soil. So therefore, the wines that you sell have to be expensive so you can recoup that initial investment. Doesn't mean that they're better wines. They've got expensive dirt. That's all.
Yeah, like for example, they said that originally came from Caucasus, but all of the Georgian wines are owned by French company now. So so all the technology kind of went back because of the Soviet Union. They didn't really uphold a lot of it. It was just 1 or 2 wines. In Moldova, actually, if you think of it, they had better wine selection than in Georgia, which is weird. I remember as a kid, we had a baseball team, and we went from Uzbekistan to Chisinau, which is the city capital of Moldova. And obviously, you know, we're teenagers and we want to try different things. We go to a wine store. We're talking about 89, 90, you know, where, you know, Russia was going through perestroika, all that stuff. And let me tell you, it blew our mind. There was about 150 different types of wines, and all Moldovan wines, any kind you want, anything you want, semi-sweet, sweet, dessert wine. And we were like, well, but we're so used to Georgian wines, you know, in our houses. But in Moldova, it was more segmented to the, you know, the Moldova region and Romania, you know, at that time.
That's another thing I'd recommend in terms if you're choosing a wine region.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to Bordeaux or Burgundy.
Right.
Because those are wine regions where it's not really that open to your, you know, your everyday tourists. Pick a wine region that is under the radar. Pick a region where there are not a lot of tourists going. Pick a region where they'll be happy to see you. Pick a region where you don't pick a region where they say, oh crap, another group of tourists, God damn it. You know, like, you know,
Well, not now. Now they're happy to see us.
Yeah, exactly. So go, you know, first of all, don't, you know, like, don't go in during harvest. If you can, go during the week and go to try something, try Sonoma. Don't go to Napa. Try Mendocino. You might like the wines there, and you're likely to learn more because you'll have more interaction. In Sonoma, it's not uncommon to be able to talk to the winemaker.
Right. Well, Greg just asked me when are we going to resume travel. So initially, when I created this group, and that was before the, you know, COVID, my initial thought would be we'll create a group where we can go try different foods, and then we'll travel as well. You know, like we'll go to Uzbekistan.
Oh, yes.
Greece, we'll go. Now, I think one of our destinations got to be somewhere in California for wine, wine country, and then just go through it, and a bunch of historical, you know, guys are getting drunk and enjoying themselves. You know, once we go get the shots and, you know, and the COVID subsided, I think that's probably one of the best ideas.
Well, you guys will have to, you could just camp out in my backyard.
Here you go. Here we go. You see, Lisa.
Where are you? Is that Lisa?
I was actually in Napa and Sonoma Valley yesterday. So I'm a half an hour away.
Where are you?
You're in, I thought you were from DC, no?
No.
Oh, you're talking about
I am California through and through.
Okay.
Yeah. And then my husband's from near Bordeaux.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, and just, you know, one comment like about the Sonoma Napa Valleys, and I think that this is probably applicable for some of the other areas as well. And, you know, visiting wine regions, one of the things that I found super helpful per Mark's recommendation is going to those small local wine shops and kind of getting to know the wines that you like, and then going out and seeing those actual winemakers and wineries, because it is a zoo. Even Sonoma, if you're in on the weekends, it's an absolute zoo with the amount of tourists and, you know, these buses that come through. So that would be my recommendation for that.
Yeah, that was one of my epiphanies when I have been to Napa twice. And, you know, because I wanted to be able to say I've been there, I've tasted the wines, you know, it's not, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm speaking from experience. And one of the wineries that I wanted to go to, a buddy of mine are there. We arrive, and literally just before we got there, 3 buses loaded with tourists got there, and there was no way we could ever have tasted wines. We just went. We just left. We're like, okay, you know, it's 4:30. They close at 6. We'll never get there. And on top of that, the one thing with wineries in Napa is that they will charge you for the tasting, even if you buy. Now this is changing in Sonoma, but, you know, back, you know, several years ago, if you bought the wine in a Sonoma tasting, they would comp you the price of the tasting. So if you didn't buy anything, they charge you $5, $10, $15. So that's another way of looking at, oh, this is a wine region where they don't have too many people because they're not charging. Or this is a wine region, oh, they charge $20 for that tasting. Well, you might be able to taste the wines, but you're not going to get a good interaction there.
Wow.
So the other thing is, I put in there, there's I've gotten a lot of experience tasting Mexican wine, which has been growing for 500 years, which a lot of people don't realize. Obviously, wine didn't get to California through an airplane. And there's just a phenomenal explosion in Mexico, and it's really, especially in Baja and South of
Guadalupe.
Ensenada.
Yeah, Guadalupe Valley.
Exactly. And so I work for a company that's headquartered or was founded in Mexico, and so there's just a lot of people, and I'm from Southern California. There's a lot of people literally have no idea that there's Mexican wine that live in California. So that's like an interesting region to kind of go to, and you could still really enjoy. It's reasonable. You just see a lot of, there's been an explosion at this point. Just in Baja, there's over 150 wineries now, winemakers, and across Mexico, it's gone from 25 to I think about 700 in the last 15 years. So it's just really exploded. So anyways, that's my commercial for.
Yeah, I would recommend. I've been to the Guadalupe Valley for a weekend, and I enjoyed some of the wines.
Yeah.
It's a very hot, dry region. They only exist with irrigation. They have to pick early because of the heat of that region. They also, that's another thing that with Guadalupe, and then there's also a wine area in Southern California between LA and San Diego. It's called Temecula.
Yep, absolutely, know it well.
One thing that I would say about Temecula is that part of the decision to grow grapes there is because they were between LA and San Diego. There's a huge population there. It's part of the business model is to have vines so that people can have receptions and weddings there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a destination thing. I've been there, and per my subjective taste, I didn't like any of the wines there, and plus they were expensive. But it's a smart economic model there. I mean, it's smart. I wouldn't mind having a vineyard there. You're going to make money.
Yep, I just put in to the chat the kind of overall Mexico one, and then I just put in the one for Baja specifically for anyone that wants that, or when
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
Sure.
I'll post everything on our channel, YouTube channel, and then I think Rich and some other people are looking to watch this online. So Mark, with your permission, I'll post this online.
Yeah, please.
And this was incredible. I mean, I learned so much. And
thank you.